It wasn't gold or glory that first burned inside Andrew Carnegie. It was shame, a humiliation so deep it seared itself into his young mind forever. Picture this. A small, tired boy in dusty clothes, barely 12, working in a Pittsburgh cotton mill. His hands raw, his back aching, his pay, $1.20 a week. The machines roared louder than his thoughts, but his real lesson didn't come from that mill. It came from home. He watched his father, a proud, honest weaver, reduced to begging for work after a factory shutdown. A man who once shaped beautiful cloth, now pleading just to survive. That image broke something inside young Andrew, and built something new. It planted a fierce, unyielding vow. Never again. He would never kneel. He would never let another man decide his fate. His ambition wasn't born from greed. It was born from pain. From the memory of powerlessness. From the day he saw dignity crushed under desperation. That pain became his purpose. Every shift in that suffocating mill became a reminder, every scream of the machines a whisper, rise, escape, build something no one can take away. He didn't dream of wealth, he plotted his escape from weakness. His poverty wasn't a prison, it was his weapon, and with that weapon, he would carve a life of unimaginable strength. The boy who delivered bobbins was quietly preparing to deliver an empire, and that empire's foundation was laid the moment he swore to himself he would never be small again. Every empire begins not with money but with awareness, and for Andrew Carnegie, power didn't first come from owning steel, it came from understanding information. Before he was a titan, he was a telegraph messenger boy running through the streets of Pittsburgh, clutching envelopes, drenched in sweat, unseen but always listening. While others simply delivered messages, Carnegie studied them. He memorized names, businesses, routes, and the rhythm of the city's heartbeat. He watched how power moved, who met whom, who sent orders, who gave commands. He was learning the anatomy of influence. And then came the moment that revealed his genius. He taught himself to read telegraphic clicks by ear. Without even seeing the paper, he could decode the message before anyone else. He wasn't just fast, he was first. That skill gave him something far greater than income. It gave him insight. He saw patterns in communication, the hidden network through which wealth and authority flowed. Carnegie realized that the true value wasn't in the messages themselves, but in understanding who controlled them. By mastering the flow of information, he made himself indispensable to men of power. And that was no accident. It was strategy. While others chased wages, he chased leverage. Every name he memorized, every signal he heard, brought him one step closer to the center of control. He was no longer just delivering the words of the powerful. He was learning how they thought. The telegraph office wasn't his job. It was his classroom. And in that classroom, Carnegie absorbed the first law of power. Those who control information control the game. He didn't yet own steel, railroads, or factories, but he already owned something far more valuable: understanding. He was building an empire of knowledge long before he built one of iron. And in silence, with nothing but a boy's hunger and a man's vision, Andrew Carnegie began his real ascent, from the messenger of others' dreams to the architect of his own. Every great fortune begins with a moment of risk, a line between comfort and greatness that only the brave dare to cross. For Andrew Carnegie, that line appeared in the form of a single opportunity, an invitation to invest in the Woodruff Sleeping Car Company. He was still a young man then, earning a modest salary at the Pennsylvania Railroad under his mentor, Thomas A. Scott. But he had already learned one vital truth. True wealth isn't earned by a paycheck, it's captured through ownership. When Scott introduced him to the idea of luxurious train cars that allowed passengers to sleep comfortably through the night, Carnegie saw more than a new invention. He saw a revolution. At a time when travel was hard, dirty, and exhausting, this innovation would redefine how America moved. Yet he didn't have the capital to invest. Most men in his position would have walked away. Carnegie didn't. He went to the bank and took out a loan, using his mother's modest home as collateral. The risk terrified his family, but he understood that the only way to change your life is to bet it. That decision marked his true transformation, from worker to capitalist. The investment paid off beyond imagination. The Woodruff Sleeping Car Company became a success, and Carnegie began receiving profits that dwarfed his salary. For the first time, money was working for him. That was the turning point. He realized that power doesn't come from laboring harder, but from positioning smarter. This wasn't just a financial gain, it was a mental shift. He saw that control and leverage were the foundations of wealth. That one risk opened a floodgate of opportunity, providing the capital that would later fund his ventures in iron, railroads, and eventually, steel. The lesson endures through time. To build an empire, you must be willing to stake your present for your future. While others feared losing what little they had, Carnegie dared to risk everything for what could be. That single decision, the courage to sign that loan, became the spark that lit the empire of steel. The young man who once earned dollars by the week had now discovered the secret of every empire builder. Security never made history. Carnegie's genius wasn't just in producing steel, it was in reducing the cost of producing it. He didn't build factories, he built systems. To him, every furnace, every worker, and every ton of ore was part of one grand equation, the cost equation. While other industrialists focused on output, Carnegie focused on efficiency. He tracked every cent that flowed through his mills with scientific precision. How much each worker earned per minute, how much each rail cost per mile, how much each heat of steel consumed in fuel. He believed that domination came not from the size of your operation, but from your ability to control its economics. When he discovered the Bessemer process, a revolutionary method to make steel faster and cheaper, he didn't hesitate. He tore down entire plants and rebuilt them around the new technology. No nostalgia, no hesitation, just optimization. Pioneering doesn't pay, he used to say, preferring to let others take the risk of innovation, then stepping in to scale the perfected version with ruthless precision. His mills became engines of productivity, where the smallest improvement was multiplied 1,000-fold in profit. This obsession turned his company into a cost-crushing machine that competitors couldn't match. Carnegie understood something few did. Business wasn't a craft. It was a mathematical war. And the winner wasn't the one who sold the most, but the one who could sell the cheapest and still profit. He didn't just make steel affordable. He made inefficiency obsolete. The lesson from this phase of his empire is timeless. If you want to dominate an industry, don't just chase revenue. Master your costs. Every number tells a story, and those who read it well rule the world. Carnegie understood that power multiplies when surrounded by the right minds, but only when he remained the center of gravity. He wasn't just building a company, he was constructing a hierarchy of brilliance, loyalty, and ambition. He recruited the most formidable men of his age, Henry Clay Frick, the unflinching operator who could run a mill with military precision, and Captain Bill Jones, a mechanical genius who turned molten steel into pure profit. These men were not employees, they were partners in conquest. Carnegie gave them carries, shares in the profits, to bind their fates to his own. It was one of the earliest and most powerful uses of equity as motivation. They didn't work for Carnegie, they worked with him, at least until they forgot who truly commanded the empire. His leadership was a delicate art of control masked as empowerment. He delegated responsibility but never authority. He praised his partners in public but negotiated in private like a silent general directing a war. Frick was the iron fist, enforcing discipline and managing the brutal side of the business. Carnegie, meanwhile, stayed above the fray, smiling, charming, playing the philosopher capitalist. Together they became an unstoppable force. Carnegie Steel ruled production, prices, and even politics. But power shared is power tested. Frick's ruthless ambition soon clashed with Carnegie's quiet dominance, and when their relationship finally broke, Carnegie did what he always did best. He cut clean, cold, and complete. He had built the alliance, he had used it, and when it no longer served him, he dismantled it without hesitation. That's how he kept his throne intact while others fell to pride or partnership. The lesson here cuts deep. Build with giants, but never forget. Empires collapse when the king forgets he's the king. Carnegie's greatest weapon wasn't steel, it was his mind. He understood that business wasn't a game of numbers, but of nerves. During the Homestead Strike of 1892, when violence erupted and blood stained the streets, his empire stood on the brink. Yet Carnegie was nowhere near the chaos. While his partner Henry Clay Frick fought a brutal war with the unions, Carnegie was comfortably settled in his Scottish castle, far from the smoke and gunfire. It wasn't cowardice, it was strategy. By staying absent, he preserved his image as the moral, benevolent industrialist, while Frick became the face of corporate cruelty. Carnegie knew that history remembers narratives, not facts, and he was writing his own. Behind the scenes, though, he was fully in control. Every decision Frick made was one Carnegie had empowered him to execute. But when public outrage exploded, Carnegie expressed disappointment, as if the bloodshed had been someone else's doing. It was psychological chess at its finest. Let your lieutenant fight the war and return later to claim the peace. He understood something timeless about power. The one who controls perception controls the outcome. Even his business negotiations reflected this mastery. Carnegie was calm, deliberate, and endlessly patient. He'd wait out rivals, charm opponents, and disguise ruthless logic behind a disarming smile. While others battled for attention, he worked in silence, reading people like a stock ticker, watching for hesitation, pride, or greed, then exploiting each with surgical precision. His empire wasn't just built on furnaces and factories, it was built on human psychology. The Homestead Strike may have stained his legacy, but it also revealed his core belief that in the grand game of power, emotional control is the ultimate advantage. You can build, lose, or sell an empire, but if you can master the mind, you can win them all back. At the height of his empire, when Andrew Carnegie stood as the undisputed king of steel, he made a move that stunned the business world. He decided to walk away. It wasn't a retreat, it was checkmate. Carnegie had always played a long game, and now, sensing the shift in the tides of power, he saw what few others did. The age of individual industrialists was ending. Men like J.P. Morgan were consolidating everything, banks, railroads, and entire industries, into vast corporate trusts. The world was moving toward financial empires, not industrial ones. Carnegie understood that if he stayed too long, he would eventually become a pawn in Morgan's larger game. So he crafted a plan as brilliant as it was simple. Rather than fighting Morgan, he would sell to him. But Carnegie didn't bargain. He didn't posture. He made one move. He scribbled a single note, his asking price, $480 million, a figure so astronomical it bordered on absurd. Then he handed the note to his secretary and told him to deliver it. That was it. No negotiation. No emotion. Just quiet certainty. When Morgan read the note, he paused only for a moment before replying with 3 legendary words. I accept it. In that instant, Carnegie had sold his empire, the largest industrial enterprise in history, and exited the stage as the richest man in the world. But it wasn't the money that mattered most. It was timing. Carnegie had chosen the moment of his own ending, proving that true mastery isn't just in building power, but in relinquishing it on your own terms. It was the final move of a grand strategist, a man who had built an empire from sweat and steel and then sold it with a stroke of a pen. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. The most powerful men don't fight for the last dollar. They decide when the game is over. If you're enjoying this story and the timeless lessons within it, subscribe for more deep dives into the psychology of power, wealth, and empire. When the smoke of industry faded and the forges went silent, Andrew Carnegie entered the final act of his life, not as a titan of steel, but as a philosopher of humanity. The man who once measured every ton of iron and every penny of profit now began to measure something far greater: legacy. Having conquered the world of business, Carnegie turned to conquer himself. He believed that wealth was never meant to be kept, only channeled. In his famous essay, The Gospel of Wealth, he declared that the man who dies rich dies disgraced. It was not a slogan. It was a moral conviction forged from his own transformation. Carnegie dedicated his fortune to building a different kind of empire, one made of knowledge, learning, and peace. He funded more than 2,500 public libraries, believing that access to books could free the mind just as industry had freed the body. He built universities, cultural institutions, and the Carnegie Foundation for Peace, an attempt to prevent the wars he feared his own steel might one day fuel. This was the paradox of his legacy. The man who had armed a nation with steel now sought to arm the world with wisdom. His later years were not without regret. He wrestled with the blood of Homestead, the moral cost of ambition, and the knowledge that his empire had been built through both creation and conflict. But he also found peace in purpose. By the time of his death, Carnegie had given away nearly 90% of his fortune, over $350 million in early 1900s dollars, an amount that, adjusted for today, would make him one of the most generous men in history. And so, the boy who once earned $1 a week ended his journey not as a capitalist, but as a giver. His empire of steel may have shaped America's skyline, but his empire of giving shaped its soul. The final truth he discovered was simple yet eternal. Money builds power, but giving builds immortality. He had spent his youth mastering the art of acquisition, and his final years mastering the grace of release. He came to America with nothing, no privilege, no power, no promise. Just a boy from a weaver's family standing in the roaring factories of a new world, watching men surrender their pride for a paycheck. From that pain, Andrew Carnegie forged a purpose, to never bow to another man's will again, and from that purpose, he built one of the greatest empires in human history. His story isn't just about steel, it's about the transformation of the human spirit, about how discipline, vision, and relentless belief can turn struggle into strength. He mastered the science of business, the psychology of power, and ultimately the philosophy of legacy. He showed that wealth is only meaningful when it transcends the self, when it becomes a force that uplifts others. Carnegie proved that true greatness lies not in what you own, but in what you create, not in how much you take, but in how much you give. His name lives not because of his fortune, but because of the minds he helped shape, the dreamers, the builders, the thinkers who walked into his libraries and found the spark of possibility within themselves. He arrived with nothing but a fire in his belly, and left having built the foundation of modern America. Andrew Carnegie's journey reminds us that the ultimate empire isn't made of steel, money, or monuments. It's made of mind, purpose, and impact. If you found this story powerful, subscribe for more timeless deep dives into the lives, lessons, and legacies of the men and women who built our world, and the psychology that powered their rise.